And welcome back to another Perspectives Chat, thoughts, ideas that fall across my radar. Um, just in the last couple of days, speaking with colleagues or listening to them, there's been, for example, talk about what's coming down the road potentially. Um, One colleague in particular was talking about how we're heading for World War III beginning next year because they're following the predictions from the Martin Armstrong Sophocles computer, which predicts the future based on trends, that is, following and analyzing trends in the present can predict what's coming. And apparently, Martin Armstrong's computer, they say, has never been wrong in the last 40 years that it's been operating. And some of the things that they're predicting is the collapse of the US, economic collapse, World War III, etc. And it makes me think that, well, these are predictions, but predictions are just exactly that. They're predicting based on certain linear trends or trends that are happening now. But the future doesn't have to be based on the now. The future can be based on the now if there are no further changes, for example, or if current trends accelerate in the same pathway and there's no unexpected interventions or wildcards or anything else, then this may happen. Um, and I'm thinking, well, is there danger in these types of predictions? Um, because we also have the element of predictive programming, whereby if certain narratives and scenarios are put into the human consciousness, then they're more likely to play out. Or if they start to play out, people are more willing to accept them because the program, the seed, has already been planted, so it's quite familiar. And so when something is familiar, you say, well, we expected that to happen. And therefore you allow those elements into your reality because you've been expecting them. And that's how predictive programming works. And in some instances, we can actually be programmed or persuaded or diverted to actually go against our natural direction, as if swimming against the tide. For example, I remember a joke that I heard from my neighbor, my old neighbor in Spain. And he told me this joke by saying that this family was having a picnic by the river, and all of a sudden, one one of one of the men starts screaming and running and asking for help, and he's calling for help, and others come to him to go for help, and he says, "My mother-in-law is falling in the river. We have to go and save her. She can't swim." So the guy starts running upriver against the tide. And his friends shout to him, waving back, saying, "No, no, no, we have to start running in that direction. The river's flowing in that direction." And the first man shouts back, "That may be so, but you don't know my mother-in-law." Um, I think I can get away with that with a mother-in-law joke. But actually, it shows you that sometimes our nature can force us to swim against the tide and to go in a way which is not natural for us. And so we end up making it more difficult for ourselves. We know the phrase, someone says, "Oh, you're making life more difficult for yourself." And if we start to believe or create a belief set around a certain direction or prediction, then we are telling our body to align with the energy and the vibration of that direction, which then starts to attract more vibration or the frequency of that chosen direction. And by doing so, you can be giving your body instructions to resist other energy. So if we're being persuaded or programmed to go down this direction, and there's some receptive energy coming in from here, we could be closed off or resistant to it because we've aligned our energy frequency direction to go down here. And so we can be resisting something which could be more beneficial to us because we've closed off energetically that avenue. I'm reminded of a cartoon series from several decades ago. I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with it. It's called The Wacky Races. And there was the character of Desperate Dan and his dog Muttley, who were the evil ones who always tried to win the race. And the Wacky Races was people in these strange cars and were always trying to win a road race. So every episode was a road race and how people were trying to win it, and how the evil Desperate Dan, I think his name was, and Muttley, his dog, will always try to divert the race so they would win and everyone else go in the wrong direction. So they would do, of course, it's now a cliche, but they would put a sign in the genuine direction. They'll put a sign saying road closed, diversion, go this way. So all the other cars would naturally follow the diversion and go the wrong way. And then Desperate Dan would take the sign away and take that path. Of course, he'd always lose. That's the moral of it. No matter how much he tried to cheat, he would always lose, and some mishap would befall him. But I think that kind of wacky races is kind of the analogy is happening now, whereby certain elements are putting up their diversion sign and saying, go in this direction, and trying to take us against the tide. And just because the majority of people are going in that direction doesn't mean it's the right direction. Again, this is the element of, follow the majority, be comfortable with this, what Matthäus Desmet calls the false solidarity. There's this idea of comfort and protection by going with the majority. But if the majority are going in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how many people are going in the wrong direction, it will never make it the right direction. Even if one person is going in the right direction, it doesn't change the fact that it's the right direction. Now, that's a bit black and white. I'm not saying that there's one right and one wrong, but we do need to be aware that there's elements in our cultural, social programming that are trying to support, promote, and persuade certain directions. And it could be most likely that those people who have the resources to manage our media and our social cultural institutions, that they have a particular future in mind. For example, we know about the talk of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset. Now, that's a future that a certain minority group wants to play out. And that minority group has a great influence in our social media, in the traditional media, also in our social, cultural, political, financial institutions. So they are saying this is the direction we need to go. But you see, that future cannot be created unless we, the people, participate in that future to make it come about. A future scenario, anything ahead of us, is not set in stone. It cannot be fully predicted. It can be brought into being by certain factors. At the same time, it can be dismantled or not brought into being by certain factors. And that is, it depends if people have an agreement with that direction. There's that phrase also, what if there was a war and nobody turned up? So you see, you need a kind of willing or grudging participation, even, to give an agreement to the future. You know, the future, just like society, is an agreement. It's a social contract, and the future is a kind of contract that we also agree that we're going in that direction. So if enough people can be persuaded or nudged or orientated into a certain future, then that future is more likely to come about. And if we are being steered into a future which a certain small group wants, then in fact we're giving them that future. So if they say in the future, by 2030, for example, you'll own nothing and be happy, and if that's programmed and repeated and planted into our consciousness so many times that people start to accept it, then it's more likely to come about. But if enough people say, no, I don't want that future, I don't want to own nothing and be happy because it's a load of nonsense, then it's much, much harder for that future to come into being because it doesn't have enough consensus agreement. So the future that we expect to come about is more likely to come about. And this, I think, is part of the play or the game that's in play right now, is that for a certain future to come about which supports a small group, they need to persuade the larger group that this is going to be their future. And so energetically it comes about without any resistance. It comes about because within the consciousness field there's an acceptance of this. Even if it's unconscious, it's an acceptance of it, or there's a willingness for it, a familiarity to it. There certainly is no resistance to it. So you could say that the human capacity of creation, of imagining an unfoldment for the future, is being hijacked to dream someone else's dream, to dream a future that some other people wish for, but it's not what we wish for. And that is an abuse of our imagination, an abuse of our creative potentials, an abuse of our free will, because we're being slyly maneuvered into using our free will into adhering with someone else's wish, someone else's intention and dream, so to speak. And so in the end, we become almost as slaves to someone else's future if we abide by that, if we give away our creative, imaginative potential. And that is what I would probably call swimming against the tide, because it's not a natural direction for us. So just to say that some things may come about because there's enough factors behind it to create the event. But these are physical events. Behind physical events, you also need a non-physical support, consciousness. If there is enough conscious negation to say, no, that's not for us, I don't want to see that, I don't want that future, then that vibration, that frequency of consciousness thought can actually, it will support something else. You cannot have a frequency of consciousness that's against something to support it into being, you see. So I think we have to be careful about predictions. We have to be mindful to discern what may be predictive programming in our media and social cultural institutions. And certainly we have the the right to choose where we wish to align ourselves with and which direction we wish to go in. And if all around us we see these like big billboards, big billboards of like, this is going to happen, war here, economic slavery here. Well, you know, just just like that film They Live. If nobody's seen the film They Live, I think it came out in 1980, directed by John Carpenter. I would recommend to watch it. And it's about how certain people, how the society can be persuaded by subliminals and certain programming in advertising and that. So we have these big billboards. Metaphorically, the billboards now is social media, memes, uh, kind of, when something goes viral, they say, "Oh, this is viral." Yeah, well, what interests are behind that going viral? It may be a deliberate act to seed a certain programming into the collective consciousness. And we need to have the mindfulness to discern what is not right for us, what we don't want to ingest, because any information that we ingest is going to be part of the food that fuels our thinking, our imagination, our frequency, and our state of being, our state of mental, emotional, psychological being. So let's not swim against the tide. Let's not be slyly maneuvered through the diversion of the wacky races to follow a detour in a direction that's not natural or organic for us. And maybe things won't happen the way that they've been predicted to happen. We don't know exactly what's behind the surfaces of things, what else is operating in the non-visible realm. Um, if we give our attention and our power and our frequency to the physical events the way they've been predicted, they're more likely to come about. And we're more likely to miss something else happening over here or other more subtle energies coming in from over here. So that's all part of what I talk about as the disentanglement from the physical density, the quagmire of energies. So that's my thoughts for today. And as always, I appreciate that you've taken the time to listen this far. Okay, be well. Until next time. Cheers.